Today is indeed a big day for many reasons, and one of those reasons is that the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, will be presenting his midterm budget policy statement in Parliament at 2 o'clock, so it's about 30 more minutes to go. Let's go back to that particular conversation and issue as to what the expectations are for this maiden speech. For that, I'm joined by Dr. Gilad Isaacs, who is co-director at the Institute for Economic Justice. Dr. Isaacs, thank you for your time today. What would you like to hear as far as policy changes are concerned today? Please, would you unmute yourself?
I don't know why you can't hear me, but
I
it's
hear you,
unmuted
I hear you
my
now,
side.
Doc. I hear you now, Doctor. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So unfortunately, I don't expect to hear much of what I would like to. Last year's medium-term budget cut about 300 billion rand in expenditure from last year's budget. And, you know, this is unfortunately the kind of trajectory which we're on in South African fiscal policy. And really in the context of the economy that's been so hard hit by COVID, what we really need to do, what we really need to see is the minister using the extra fiscal space which has been opened up by both higher than expected GDP and increased tax revenue to be providing the type of emergency and medium-term support which the economy needs. And that would be in the form of increased social grants, including laying out a pathway towards a universal basic income grant. It would be in filling vacancies in the public sector. It would be increasing expenditure in health, in infrastructure, in support to targeted industrial sectors. And instead, what we expect to see is more of the same, which is either a flatlining of the lowered expenditure or a reduction thereof.
As the Institute for Economic Justice, you do also focus on those who are on the margins of the economy and who don't really benefit from the economic benefits that may be derived from others. As far as women are concerned, and do you believe that there would be or that there should be a focus on them in this midterm budget policy statement?
Absolutely. What we've seen lately is rhetorical priority being given in this respect. So we've seen, for instance, Treasury launch a gender responsive budgeting project, you know, with the attempt that all budgets should reflect such priorities. Unfortunately, this hasn't really been carried through in practice. So, for instance, there hasn't been meaningful fiscal allocation on the President's long-standing promise to increase measures which will reduce gender-based violence, just as one instance. What we also know is the kinds of expenditure cuts which we've seen over the last 24 to 48 months disproportionately impacts women. So when there is a cut in health services, in education services, and so on, that impacts women both because they are disproportionately employed in those sectors and because it increases the unpaid work, the various care work which women undertake in a family in environment, and which is unfortunately not equally shared. And so whilst there's a rhetorical commitment, in practice the kinds of fiscal trajectory which we're on is making life harder for women and poor black women in particular in South Africa.
And what should the minister address when it comes to the wage bill?
The wage bill, I think, needs to be seen in a broad context. So the first is that the areas of the wage bill which need to be contained is growth at the upper end, right? There are senior people in government, in the bureaucracy, who are where there's room to see a freezing or a reduction in wage expenditure. What we don't want to see is two things. What we don't want to see is a reduction or a freezing of wages at the lower end and for those involved in service delivery. These are essential workers in our economy, and they are also workers who generally spend all of their income and who often spend that in local economies. What we also don't want to see is further freezing of jobs in the public sector. And unfortunately, that's what we've seen in recent years. We have thousands of vacancies in critical social services. Earlier this year, it was reported that there were 4,000 vacancies in KZN schools. We know that there are vacancies across the board in really important frontline services. So, I don't think that a negotiation between public sector unions and the state, which looks at the public sector wage bill and its overall place in fiscal allocations is inappropriate. But that needs to be done in a collaborative way, and it needs to be done in a way which protects and advances frontline services.
Dr. Gilad Isaacs, thank you for your time. He is co-director at the Institute for Economic Justice.